For a moment, no one in the ballroom moved. The soft piano music had already faded, but now even the quiet hum of conversation was gone. It felt as though the entire Carter estate had stopped breathing. William Carter blinked slowly, certain he must have misheard the young girl standing in front of him. Around them, dozens of wealthy guests stared in confusion. A few exchanged glances, unsure whether the girl was joking or simply nervous under the pressure of the moment. The cameras that had been lifted earlier by journalists hovered awkwardly in the air, as if waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. Maria Alvarez, standing near the edge of the room, looked as though the floor had suddenly disappeared beneath her feet. Her hands tightened around the cloth she had been holding, and her face turned pale with shock. 14 years of working quietly in this house had taught her one rule above all others: never create a scene. Yet now her daughter had done exactly that in front of the most powerful people in the city. William finally spoke, his voice calm, but filled with disbelief. "I am sorry," he said slowly. "Could you repeat that?" Emily did not look away. She stood straight, her hands resting calmly at her sides, as if she had already rehearsed this moment many times in her mind. "My first wish," she said again, clearly this time, "is that you fire my mother." The reaction rippled through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind across a lake. Several guests gasped quietly. Others leaned closer to one another, whispering behind raised hands. One man near the back gave a short, uncomfortable laugh before quickly stopping when he realized no one else found the situation amusing. Maria stepped forward immediately, her voice shaking. "Emily, that is enough," she said softly but urgently. "You do not speak like that here." Her eyes moved toward William Carter with visible embarrassment. "I am very sorry, sir. She does not understand. She is only a child." But Emily gently reached back and touched her mother's arm. "I understand exactly what I am saying," she replied quietly. William studied the girl carefully now. Moments earlier he had expected excitement, perhaps even gratitude. Instead he saw something far different in her expression. There was no anger, no arrogance, and certainly no disrespect. What he saw, instead, was determination, the kind that usually came from someone much older than 17. He folded his hands in front of him and looked down at her with curiosity that had now completely replaced his earlier amusement. "Why would you wish for that?" he asked. Emily took a slow breath. For the first time she glanced briefly toward the crowd of elegant guests surrounding them, then back to William. "Because my mother deserves a life," she said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried through the silent ballroom with surprising strength. Maria shook her head quickly. "Emily, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You do not need to say these things." But Emily continued, her voice calm and steady. "She wakes up at 5:30 every morning," she said. "She rides the bus almost an hour to get here. Some nights she does not get home until after 8. A few of the guests shifted uncomfortably. Many of them had never once thought about how the staff arrived or how long their days truly lasted. Emily's eyes moved briefly toward the enormous windows behind William, where the dark outline of the 20-acre estate stretched into the night. "This house is beautiful," she continued. "Everyone says so. But the people who clean it, cook in it, and take care of it are tired all the time." William said nothing. Maria looked down at the floor, clearly wishing the moment would simply disappear. Emily's voice softened as she looked at her mother. "My mother works harder than anyone I know," she said. "But every night she comes home so tired she falls asleep at the kitchen table." A few guests lowered their eyes, suddenly aware that the glamorous evening had taken an unexpected turn. William Carter slowly leaned back, his expression thoughtful now. "And you believe the best thing I could do for her," he said carefully, "is take away her job?" Emily nodded gently. "Yes," she said, "because she has given enough of her life to this house already." The room remained completely silent as the billionaire looked at the young girl standing before him, realizing that the first wish he had promised to grant was nothing like he had imagined. William Carter remained standing in the center of the ballroom, the quiet weight of Emily's words lingering in the air like the final note of a piano that had not yet faded. The billionaire looked around the room slowly, noticing something he had rarely paid attention to during gatherings like this. The expressions on the faces of his guests had changed. Earlier that evening they had been smiling, relaxed, enjoying expensive food and polite conversations about markets and investments. Now many of them looked thoughtful, even slightly uncomfortable, as if a curtain had been pulled back on something they had never truly examined. William turned his attention back to Emily. The girl had not moved. She stood calmly with the same quiet determination that had surprised him from the moment she spoke her first wish. He folded his arms loosely and took a slow breath. "Emily," he said, his voice measured and steady. "When I offered 3 wishes tonight, I expected something very different." A few guests gave quiet, nervous laughs, but William did not smile. "Most people," he continued, "would have asked for money, a car, maybe even a college fund. Those are the kinds of wishes I thought I would hear." Emily nodded slightly. "I know," she replied. William studied her carefully. "But you asked for something that would actually remove income from your household," he said. "That is not a simple request." Emily looked toward her mother again, then back at the billionaire. "It is simple if you see what it gives back," she answered. William raised an eyebrow. "And what does it give back?" he asked. Emily's voice softened. "Time." The single word settled over the room. William glanced briefly toward Maria, who was still standing quietly with her hands clasped together. For the first time he noticed small details that had never registered before. The faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes. The way her shoulders remained slightly tense even while standing still. The careful posture of someone used to staying invisible in expensive spaces. The billionaire slowly walked a few steps closer to her. "Maria," he said gently, "what time do you leave home every morning?" Maria hesitated before answering honestly. 5:30, sir." "And what time do you usually return?" William asked. "Around 8 in the evening, sir, sometimes later if there are events." Several guests exchanged glances again. William nodded thoughtfully. "That means you spend almost 15 hours away from home on most workdays," he said quietly. Maria nodded again, embarrassed by the attention but unable to deny the truth. William turned back to Emily. "Your mother does not complain about this," he said. Emily shook her head gently. "No," she replied. "She would never complain. She believes working hard is something to be proud of." William considered that for a moment. "And you disagree?" he asked. Emily smiled faintly. "I believe working hard is good," she said. "But I also believe a person should eventually have the chance to stop working so hard just to survive." A murmur of agreement moved quietly through part of the audience, though no one spoke aloud. William Carter slowly walked toward the large birthday cake that still sat untouched on a nearby table. The candles had already been blown out earlier in the evening, leaving thin trails of smoke that had long since disappeared. He placed one hand lightly against the edge of the table and looked back at the girl who had unexpectedly turned his celebration into something far more meaningful. "Emily," he said calmly, "you understand that if I grant this wish exactly as you requested, your mother will no longer be employed here starting tomorrow morning." Emily nodded without hesitation. "Yes." William watched her closely. "And you are still certain that is what you want?" The girl answered without pausing. "Yes." The billionaire exhaled slowly, realizing that the promise he had made casually only minutes earlier had now become a decision that would reveal far more about his character than any business deal he had ever signed. William Carter stood quietly beside the large table where the untouched birthday cake still rested beneath the soft golden lights of the ballroom. For years he had been known as a man who made decisions quickly in business meetings, a leader who could evaluate numbers and risks in seconds. Yet this moment felt different. This was not a contract or a negotiation. This was a promise spoken out loud in front of hundreds of witnesses, and the meaning of that promise now rested on a 17-year-old girl who refused to ask for anything that benefited herself. William slowly turned back toward Emily. She had not moved. Her posture remained calm, her eyes steady, as though she had already accepted whatever outcome would follow. The billionaire studied her carefully for another long moment before finally speaking again. "Very well," he said slowly. The words were quiet but carried clearly across the silent room. "Your first wish will be granted." A ripple of surprise moved through the guests once again. Maria lifted her head immediately, her eyes wide with confusion. "Sir," she said quickly, stepping forward. "Please, you do not need to do this. I did not ask for." William gently raised one hand, stopping her. "Maria," he said calmly, "this request was not meant as an insult to your work. In fact, it seems to be the opposite." He turned slightly toward Emily again. "Your daughter believes you have given enough of your time here. Maria shook her head softly, overwhelmed. But this job has taken care of us for many years, she said. It has given my daughter stability. Emily reached out and gently held her mother's hand. Mom, she said quietly. It also took almost all of your days. The room remained silent as mother and daughter looked at one another. William Carter watched them closely, realizing something that had not occurred to him until this evening. For 14 years Maria had been part of his household, yet he had never truly asked about her life outside these walls. He knew the schedules of his senior executives, the investment strategies of his partners, and the quarterly earnings of companies across the country, but he did not know how long his own employees spent riding a bus every morning to reach the estate. The realization sat heavily in his thoughts. William stepped forward again, addressing Maria directly. Your employment here will officially end at the close of tonight's event, he said gently. The words caused several people in the room to shift again, but William raised his hand slightly, signaling that he had not finished speaking. However, he continued, your 14 years of service will not simply disappear. Maria looked at him with uncertainty. William walked to a nearby side table where several envelopes prepared for evening announcements had been placed earlier. He picked up one of them, then returned to stand before Maria and Emily. Inside this envelope is a severance package equivalent to 3 full years of your current salary, he explained calmly. The room gasped quietly again. Maria stared at the envelope as though it were something unreal. Sir, that is too generous, she said softly. William shook his head. No, he replied. It is overdue. Emily's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent. William continued, his voice thoughtful. You asked me to fire your mother because you believed she deserved time. This will give her time to rest, time to decide what she wishes to do next, and time to enjoy the life she has worked hard to support. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the envelope. Tears filled her eyes, though she tried to remain composed in front of the crowd. Thank you, Mr. Carter, she said quietly. William nodded gently, then turned his attention back to Emily. You have 2 wishes remaining, he said. The billionaire's voice carried across the ballroom again, but now it sounded different. It no longer carried the tone of a playful birthday challenge. Instead, it carried the seriousness of a man who had begun to realize that the young girl standing before him might ask for things that would change far more than just one job. The envelope rested carefully in Maria's trembling hands as the quiet murmur of the ballroom slowly returned. Some guests whispered to each other, still surprised by the direction the evening had taken, while others simply watched the young girl standing beside her mother with a kind of quiet admiration. Only 20 minutes earlier the celebration had been another elegant event filled with polite conversations and expensive laughter. Now the entire room seemed focused on a single teenager who had asked for something no one else in that room would have imagined requesting. William Carter stepped back slightly, giving Maria a moment to breathe as she carefully wiped the corner of her eye. He had attended hundreds of corporate events in his life, but rarely had he seen such genuine emotion inside a room built for luxury. After a few seconds, he looked again at Emily. The billionaire's expression was different now. Earlier he had spoken with curiosity, almost amusement. Now there was something more thoughtful behind his eyes. You said you had 3 wishes, he reminded her calmly. One has been granted. Emily nodded quietly. Yes. The room waited. William gestured gently with one hand. What is your second wish? Emily glanced around the ballroom for the first time since speaking earlier that evening. The golden lights of the chandeliers reflected off glasses and polished surfaces while nearly 100 guests watched her carefully. Some of them were CEOs, investors, and philanthropists whose names appeared regularly in business magazines. Yet in that moment, every one of them seemed to be waiting for the next sentence from a girl who had arrived that night simply to sit quietly beside her mother. Emily turned her attention back to William. My second wish is not only for my family, she said slowly. William tilted his head slightly, listening. Go on. Emily took a small breath before continuing. I wish that every employee who works in this house and every employee who works in your company can have a chance to send their children to college if those children are willing to study hard. A wave of quiet surprise moved through the room again, though this time it sounded less like shock and more like curiosity. Several guests leaned closer to hear the rest of her words. Emily continued calmly. My mother always tells me that education is the one thing that can change a person's future. But many families who work very hard still cannot afford college. William crossed his arms loosely as he considered the request. You are asking me to create scholarships, he said. Yes, Emily replied. Scholarships for the children of your employees. A few executives standing near the back of the ballroom exchanged quick glances. They understood immediately that such a program would not be a small gesture. Carter Technologies employed thousands of people across the country. A scholarship program could affect hundreds of families every year. William noticed those glances, but kept his attention on the girl. That is a very large wish, he said calmly. Emily nodded. Yes. And you are certain you do not want that opportunity just for yourself? He asked. Emily smiled gently. If I study hard enough, I will find my own way, she said. But many other kids will never even get the chance to try. The room became quiet again. William Carter slowly walked a few steps across the marble floor, thinking carefully. In business meetings, investors often asked him about long-term strategy and social impact. Yet the idea now being presented had come not from a consultant or advisor, but from a 17-year-old girl who had spent years watching her mother return home exhausted after long workdays. After several seconds, he stopped walking and looked directly at Emily again. Your second wish, he said slowly, is that I help give opportunity to families who work for me. Emily nodded. Yes. William exhaled thoughtfully. Then he gave a small, decisive nod. Very well, he said. Your second wish will also be granted. Emily's words lingered in the air for a quiet moment as every guest in the ballroom waited to hear the final wish that had already changed the entire tone of the evening. The golden light from the chandeliers reflected gently across the marble floor, and even the waiters standing near the walls seemed frozen in place, careful not to interrupt the moment. William Carter looked at the young girl standing before him with a thoughtful expression that had replaced the confident certainty he carried earlier in the night. He had built companies, negotiated billion-dollar partnerships, and guided thousands of employees across the country. Yet he could not remember the last time someone had asked him such a simple and honest question about happiness. Emily took a slow breath before speaking again. My final wish, she said gently, is that you come to dinner with us. A quiet murmur moved through the room, though this time it was not shock, but curiosity. William raised his eyebrows slightly. Dinner, he repeated. Emily nodded. At our home, she continued. Just one evening. No reporters, no business partners, no speeches. Several guests smiled quietly at the unexpected simplicity of the request. William folded his arms loosely and studied her carefully. You understand that you could ask for something much larger, he said. Money, a scholarship for yourself, anything you want. Emily gave a small, thoughtful smile. I already asked for the things that matter most, she replied. William tilted his head slightly. And dinner matters? He asked. Emily glanced briefly toward her mother, who was still holding the envelope with disbelief and gratitude written across her face. Then she looked back at the billionaire. My mother says people should always share a meal when they want to understand each other, she explained. You have lived in that big house for many years, and my mother has worked there almost every day. But you have never eaten dinner together. The room fell silent again. William Carter considered the idea. In truth, he could not remember the last time he had eaten a simple dinner in someone's apartment without assistance arranging every detail or business conversations filling the evening. His meals were usually formal events, meetings, or quick dinners during flights between cities. Emily continued softly, our apartment is small. The kitchen table only has 4 chairs, but my mother cooks the best chicken soup I have ever tasted. A few guests chuckled quietly at that, though the warmth in the girl's voice made the request feel sincere rather than playful. William looked toward Maria again. She seemed both embarrassed and deeply touched by the suggestion. Mr. Carter, she said gently, you do not need to do that. We would never expect. William raised his hand again with a calm smile. Maria, he said, tonight your daughter has reminded me of something very important. He turned back to Emily. You asked me earlier if I was happy, he continued. Perhaps I do not think about that question often enough. Emily said nothing, simply waiting for his answer. William Carter straightened slightly and nodded. Your third wish is granted, he said calmly. A soft wave of applause spread through the ballroom as the guests recognized the simple beauty of the moment. The billionaire of Carter Technologies had just accepted an invitation to eat dinner at the small apartment of the woman who had quietly cared for his home for 14 years. Emily smiled warmly, and Maria wiped another tear from her eye as the realization settled in. That evening had begun as a celebration of success and wealth, but by the time the chandeliers dimmed and the guests slowly prepared to leave, everyone in the room understood something unexpected had happened. A billionaire had offered 3 wishes, and a young girl had used them not to gain riches, but to remind the most powerful man in the room what truly mattered.